Good morning, Wally.
Good morning, good Erev Shabbos, everybody. Uh, Although in the Kriyas Torah we're finishing up the Makos and getting ready for Yetzias Mitzrayim, I'm still stuck at the beginning of Shmos, and I'm focusing this morning on an interesting comment of Rashi. When Moshe was born, he was brought up in the palace of Basparo, and the custom was, and still is in many places, that wealthy people, royalty, and so forth, hire a wet nurse to nurse their newborn children. They don't do it themselves. And Basparo hired a wet nurse for Moshe, but he would not nurse from an Egyptian. And Rashi quotes the famous Medrash that how can the mouth that will at one point address the Shekhinah, talk to God directly, how can I nurse from a non-Egyptian, an Egyptian, a pagan who has ingested non-kosher food and so forth? How can I begin my life with non-kosher food through the milk of this Egyptian wet nurse? Because it is well known that non-kosher food is metamtem es halev. Not sure exactly what that means. It has metaphysical or spiritual properties that affect a person somehow. Not necessarily physically, although we'll talk about that in the Ramban in a moment, but non-kosher food, if it's ingested, has an effect on people that's called timtum halev. The one perush that talks about actually causing arteriosclerosis, that's a whole separate discussion. But it does not refer to physical problems, it refers to some kind of spirituality. I want to focus on this because it has many, many implications. This apparently is a concept throughout Jewish thought and in halacha in terms of ingesting non-kosher food. Are there circumstances in which this is ever permitted? Pikuach nefesh, for example. What if somebody ingested non-kosher food by accident? You thought it was kosher and it wasn't. And furthermore, a more modern or contemporary application is what about blood transfusions from people who don't keep kosher? Again, life-threatening situations, there are no questions asked. But under normal circumstances, does it only apply to physical food or does it apply to blood transfusions as well? Fascinating discussion. Rashi on the spot says that the heart becomes clogged from the entrance of any wisdom, any chachma. B'tamtem es halev means that it blocks your acquisition of Torah knowledge if you imbibe non-kosher food or ingest non-kosher food. And again, just to clarify, if it's a life-threatening situation, you eat treif on Yom Kippur, and there's a special benching that you say. We're not talking about life-threatening situations now, and all bets are off. The Ramban is the person that introduces the concept that non-kosher food might have a physical damage to the body. And that opens up a whole can of worms over history where people claim that, the health reasons to keep kosher, and health has nothing to do with kashrus. Because the Torah is not a medical textbook, according to the Abarbanel, and the metaphysical or spiritual properties are what, whether it refers to midos, whether it refers to acquisition of Torah knowledge. Clearly, we're not talking, even though the Ramban and others seem to indicate that, we don't accept that as the normative interpretation of kashrus. But the timtum halev refers to some type of quasi-spiritual effect on a person's mind. The lev does not necessarily mean literally the heart. It means the mind. It means learning. Interesting question comes up. brought up by the Ran, people follow the psak of the Sanhedrin. And if the Sanhedrin made a mistake and it caused you to violate an Aveira, so is that Aveira still in place, even though you rely on the Sanhedrin that made a mistake? And clearly, the poskim seem to hold that if you're relying on the Sanhedrin, even when they make a mistake, you're not held accountable for it, so to speak. So basically, Timtum Alev is metaphysical properties inherent in non-kosher food. And certain mitzvos, however, can remove Timtum Halev. It's a fascinating category. For example, let's go back to the Moshe Rabbeinu's nurse, his wet nurse. There are many poskim who hold that you're not allowed, api halacha, to have a non-Jewish wet nurse for a Jewish child, period. Because unfortunately, throughout the Middle Ages, very often non-Jewish wet nurses or midwives in some cases would actually kill Jewish children. And we're concerned about that. Even though it might be poison the baby, even though you maybe watch out. So there is an ingrained hesitation to have non-Jewish wet nurses, and we follow this halacha whenever possible. There are also poskim who hold that you don't have babysitters that are non-Jewish for the same reason. We don't necessarily poskin that way. It might be permissible to have a Jewish baby nurse, but it's a midas chasidus, according to Rashba, to avoid it. If you do have a non-Jewish wet nurse, then during that time period that she's nursing the baby, again, most people don't do this anymore, but throughout the Middle Ages it was prevalent, that the nurse not eat non-kosher food during that period of time when she's nursing. As long as she's eating kosher food, it's less of a problem. And even a non-observant Jewish nurse should be very careful to only eat kosher food. Again, the Ramah paskins that you should not use a non-Jewish nurse because it is Timtum Halev. And then there's a discussion among the Mefarshim about that, the Shach and so forth. Interesting, the take of the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, Shneur Zalman of Ladi, in the Balatanya, he writes about the importance at the very young age of a child is first born of giving a spiritual purpose to everything that one eats. And whether how you infuse Kedusha into what you eat on Shabbos, everything that you eat contains energy that nourishes the spirit. And you can't do that when you're eating non-kosher food. So clearly, that's a whole different approach. Pikuach Nefesh, as I said, doesn't apply then. If it's Pikuach Nefesh, as I said, you can eat non-kosher on Yom Kippur. Interestingly, Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, he was a contemporary, 20th
Now they
century.
finally let me in.
He says that Moshe spoke directly with Hashem. And that it's very clear. Not all of us are on that madrega. Moshe Rabbeinu spoke directly with Hashem, and the mouth that spoke with Hashem should not have ingested non-kosher food. Why should that halacha make its way into the Shulchan Aruch? I mean, how many of us are going to be in that position? So he answers beautifully, is that our attitude in raising our Jewish children should be that they all have the potential to be Nevi'im, like Moshe Rabbeinu. So we shouldn't sell our children short on their potentialities. It's a brilliant understanding of this concept of not ingesting kosher food even at right after birth when a child is nursing. In times of war, this question comes up. The Gemara clearly states that during the initial war of the 7 nations to conquer Israel, they were allowed to eat chazer, to eat pig. Again, does this call Timtum Halev? If you're engaged in the mitzvah, kibbutz haaretz, and in general, throughout different time periods when Jews were involved in the army. You can't always get kosher food. In World War II, it wasn't always possible for observant Jewish soldiers to get kosher food. Now you can get glatt kosher food all over the world. The Jewish chaplains today have access to that. But earlier times in America, you didn't have that. And a lot of frum Jewish soldiers during World War II didn't eat meat. They ate vegetables or dairy. But the Mefarshim talk about it, that during war, it's a different situation if a person is sick and a physician tells you that you have to eat meat on Shabbos. Fascinating question. You have two options. If a doctor says you must eat meat on Shabbos, so do you eat non-kosher meat or do you slaughter an animal? Which is preferable? To eat non-kosher meat, because nevela, for example, is only an Isra Malkus, where the Shabbos is Isra Skila, Chayiv Misa. But either way, you'd have to light a fire to cook the food. There are many violations of Shabbos that take place, as well as the Isra Nevela. The Maharam of Rutenberg Paskins, it's better to slaughter the animal because Pikuach Nefesh is mutter on Shabbos. In a life-threatening situation, as I said, all bets are off. Again, the philosophical issues involved are discussed in great detail. When you eat non-kosher food, the issue of Timtum Halev enters the picture, whereas eating Michal Shabbos to get kosher food would not involve that. Going back to the scenario with soldiers are if you're involved certainly in kibbutz haaretz, you're certainly allowed to eat it, even though it might cause timtum halev. The Maharal says that there's no inherent spiritual danger in eating non-kosher food during a wartime, and if there's no violation, there's no timtum halev. So you have differences of opinion there. One of the most fascinating tshuvos in responsive literature was written by the Chassam Sofer. A child who had to be institutionalized, the child had some mental issues, and the child, in order to get the treatment that the child needed, had to be sent to an institution, some type of an asylum, where kosher food was not available. Should the parents send the child to this institution? And he said it's better for this child to remain with whatever mental deficiency he has, rather than eating non-kosher food. Very controversial tshuva that the Chassam Sofer wrote. You can argue with it, and as a matter of fact, the Beis Yitzchak did argue with him, and it says that you should employ the concept of for example, when you want to save a life, you can be Machal Shabbos, and the principle between that, is that you violate one Shabbos in order to observe future Shabbosim. So here too, Timtum Halev should not enter the picture. You get the child the treatment that he can get in order to be more of a functioning Jew, and he disagrees with the Chassam Sofer. But the Chassam Sofer is not a minor player here. And the issue that just shows how important kashrus is and how important the issue of Timtum Halev is to remain open to spiritual growth is the whole issue of Timtum Halev. Are there differences between Isurim D'Oraisa and Isurim D'Rabbanan? Machlokas Achronim that talk about all of these issues in terms of violating Shabbos, eating non-kosher food. A lot of discussion on it, which gets into very, very detailed. Let's bring it up to the 21st century now. If a person needs a blood transfusion, and the only blood available is from non-Jews,
would you know that,
who eat non-kosher food, is it permissible?
That's
So obviously, Timtum Halev would apply, but if you're dealing in a case of a pikuach nefesh, then it's not even a question.
yeah,
There's a difference.
nobody
Yeah,
does a blood transfusion for fun.
I
So
understand. No, but there are times when a blood transfusion must take place immediately, or it can be scheduled. There are different types of. Again, if it's an emergency situation, pikuach nefesh doches kol haTorah kula. Okay, and there is some discussion whether it's a difference between ingesting milk from a non-Jewish wet nurse versus because that comes through the mouth versus a blood transfusion where it does not go through the mouth. You're not ingesting it in normal sense of eating.
In my own personal experience, I had many blood transfusions when I was in the hospital with leukemia, and even before that. And when
Right.
they needed to have a transfusion, I don't see how getting blood from the blood bank in wherever hospital you happen to be in or whatever area you're in, you're going to sort of say, give me a Jewish donor. I mean, that's
Okay.
it's not
So
going to happen. That's just not going to happen.
let me
I don't
address that issue
think.
direct. Let me address that issue, Sam. First of all, it does happen. The
But it
Breuer's
does.
community maintains a blood bank of Shomer Shabbos donors.
oh my
And
God.
a person who is hospitalized, who needs a blood transfusion, can request it from that blood bank. And what I'm suggesting, not that you can't accept blood transfusion. If a blood transfusion is deemed necessary, you take it regardless of where it comes from. But if the concern of Timtum Alev is there, and it is, according to many poskim, I think it would be a worthwhile project for the RCBC. And in fact, I was thinking of writing to the current president of the RCBC and suggesting to undertake this project of developing a blood bank of Shomer Shabbos people in Bergen County. There are many hospitals that have access to different blood banks. And if this is available and people know it's available, uh, what have we lost? If we are concerned, going back to that original Rashi in Pasha Shmos, where we're concerned about Timtum Halev. Now again, you can argue, and I'm not suggesting otherwise. All blood transfusions to save a life are acceptable. Period. Sof pasuk. However, if you have the availability of blood from people that only ate kosher food, then that raises the stakes a little bit higher in terms of the issue of Timtum Halev. There are many people for whom keeping kosher is very, very important. And they'll undergo all types of privations in order to get kosher food. Do we extend this to blood transfusions as well? Is an interesting question. Not everybody says that because you're not ingesting it orally, so it's not the same. But there
Well,
are other folks who say that, again, Timtum Halev is a serious issue. That's all I'm suggesting.
but I've also heard people say that same thing with vitamins. You don't eat them. You may swallow them, but you don't eat them. You don't chew them. So
Again,
so it's
you're
not
100,
exactly the same.
you are 100% correct, which is why there are two kosher vitamin laboratories that provide kosher vitamins. There's Adwe, and I forget the other one. There's the two laboratories that
So
produce.
Solar also has a lot of
All right. So again,
kosher also. There are a few.
is it mandatory? No. Is it desirable? Quite possibly. That's all I'm suggesting. This all goes back to again the two comments. First comment is Moshe Rabbeinu's comment that the mouth that speaks to Hashem should not ingest, even from the earliest stages, anything that's not kosher because of Timtum Halev, the spiritual effect that it'll have on the body. And Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky's brilliant comment that even though not all of us are Moshe Rabbeinu's, we have to be aware and conscious of the fact that our children have the potential of becoming Nevi'im. Why not? If we raise our children with that in mind, I think it's a very positive hashkafa to have. So it's all based on this one little Rashi in the beginning of Shmos, and the Mefarshim, Rishonim and Achronim debate all the manifestations of this concept of Timtum Halev, ingesting non-kosher food will somehow have a spiritual effect on the individual. In order to avoid that, we try to eat only kosher food. Whether it extends to blood transfusions is a fascinating debate, but I think if it's possible to have a blood bank of people that are Shomer Shabbos and only keep kosher, that would be a desirable thing. Breuer's already has it, and I see no reason that the Bergen County Jewish community is vibrant enough that they can do this also. And I don't think the Red Cross would have any problem with maintaining a blood bank of that sort.
I doubt my doctors in Hackensack would have had any doubt if they would have been quickly available when they needed it.
Again,
you know,
once it's available,
I
and people
doubt
are
they would
aware
have
that it's
used it.
available. It's a suggestion. Whether they take me up on it or not, I'll let you know. I just thought I would share this thing. It's been sitting on my mind for a while.
It's an idea.
Again, mandatory, it may not be, but certainly recommended to avoid the ingestion of non-kosher food whenever possible is something that we should try to do. That's all I'm
Wally,
saying.
Wally,
Yes.
what did you say about dietary supplements?
There
Vitamins
are
and
companies, again, you can take, it's not considered food. It's chemically processed. And according to many poskim, it's no problem taking vitamins made from whatever, even non-kosher fish and so forth and so on. Gelatin, most capsules are made from non-kosher gelatin, although most gelatin in this country is made from vegetable sources now. Anyway, it's kosher. But there are two companies that manufacture kosher vitamins. So any vitamin that you have to get, you can buy from this company for those that are concerned about it. But it's not considered food in the strict sense of food. So therefore, vitamins, in 99% of the cases, you can have all kinds of vitamins, no matter what they're made of, because it's already beyond the stage of food. It's chemically processed.
I see.
And most gelatin capsules are probably kosher anyway, because most people today, I don't think since the 1940s or 50s, I don't think they make gelatin anymore from hoofs of animals. They probably use agar seaweed to make gelatin in most cases.
Well, a lot of vitamins are certified vegetarian, which means I guess they don't have, any of those kind of additives that you're talking about.
Yes,
non-kosher.
and so forth.
So,
Yeah.
so sometimes there are some things that I know I take. I look for vegetarian when I can't get kosher, when I can't get it in Solgar or one of the other brands I look for in vitamins. Just saying, interesting idea.
Rabbi,
Yes.
could you clarify again? You had talked about if a child or individual has some mental issues and there's only a facility that gives non-kosher food or something.
Okay.
I
This
don't
was the. I'm not poskening, and certainly the Chassam Sofer was a great authority, but he's a das yochid in this category. He was the one that said better the child should remain in his mentally deficient state than go to an institution where they serve non-kosher food. Clearly, not everybody would agree with that. I remember feeling very, very badly. I mean, years ago, I'm talking about in 1980, when I founded the Sinai schools, and I was raising money for it. We had a fellow in our community who has since passed away, who had a daughter who was severely retarded, and at a young age, they had to send her away to South Jersey to an institution where she could be cared for. Not a Jewish institution, not kosher, and she grew up pretty much as a non-Jew. And the man was an observant Jew, and he cried to me, and he says, if I'd had a place like that for my daughter, I would have funded it myself. And, and if you want to open a facility for the retarded, I'll give you money for it. That was what I was doing at the time. But unfortunately, this is a reality that there aren't enough facilities for people who are. If you look, for example, in the Satmar community in Williamsburg, they have a very, very high percentage of childbirths with different
Down.
types of mental problems, because there's a lot of in marriages and families and relatives, and there are very, very few places to handle that. When I was doing my rabbinic training, and we were doing some pastoral work, and we visited the mental ward at Bellevue Hospital, and there were Hasidic children there who were not getting kosher food. There was no place else to go at that time. Now we have a few places, very few, but it's a terrible dilemma for a parent. You know, your child's welfare overall versus the whole issue of kashrus, and it's a very, very serious problem. The Jewish community has not adequately dealt with this problem yet. I mean, the fact that it took until 1980 to have a school for children is also shameful. And I keep on berating myself that I didn't think of it earlier. How can you not provide for these children?
Hey, Wally,
Yes.
you have the similar issue with elderly, because many nursing homes and rehabs that were kosher are giving it up.
Yeah, I just
Correct.
read. I just read. Not only that, the home in Rockaway is no longer under RCBC supervision. They now offer kosher and non-kosher options. Very upsetting. I remember when the daughters of Miriam wanted to do the same thing, I sued them. And I won.
I can't believe you won.
My late mother was there at the time, and even though she had I said, you are a kosher home. You can't offer kosher style or non-kosher options, even though many of your population doesn't care. Unfortunately, where we should have more kosher facilities, we have fewer, because the community, for some reason, is not willing to support this. We have needy people in our community, whether it's children, whether it's adults, elderly. There are a lot of needs that require hospitalization or institutionalization, where kosher facilities are not available. And I think that's on the Jewish community for their own din v'cheshbon, that there should be more places like this. But the Chassam Sofer's tshuva is a das yachid, and people argued with him. Although you had to be a great scholar to argue with the Chassam Sofer, but there were people who argued with him, and it still remains a serious dilemma, because Timtum Alev is a serious concept that was introduced by the Medrash and by the Ramban and other Rishonim, and people take this very, very seriously whenever possible. That's why kashrus is so important to Jewish life. Something to think about over Shabbos. Any other questions, comments, critiques?
I just want to comment on something that has nothing to do with kashrut, but does have to do with Shabbos. And I read years ago, there was an article dealing with Rabbi Twersky. I know there are a million of them. I forget which one, the big psychologist and everything.
Psychiatrist, Pittsburgh.
Psychiatrist. Yeah. And he was treating, there was a young girl who was suffering terribly from anorexia and all. I mean, it was me'alu me'ever. And there was a very special program that she could get into, but the sessions were always on Shabbos. This is a Shomer Shabbos person. And Rabbi Twersky gave the heter, and he said it was really pikuach nefesh. If she didn't attend this program on Shabbos, she would die. And he gave the heter for her to go.
Yeah.
Which I think is fabulous.
He was a brilliant physician, a Hasidic Rebbe and a Talmud Chacham.
Right.
When he retired, I think he lived in either Teaneck or Monsey for a few years. A brilliant man, and we need more people like that. And there are more and more physicians who are also rabbis, and we need more people. The whole area of medical halacha is a huge, huge field, and the rabbis don't know enough about medicine, and the doctors don't know enough about halacha, and it's very rare when you have individuals who understand both of those disciplines. And we need people because, unfortunately, as life goes on and life becomes more complicated and medical situations become more and more difficult to deal with, we need people that are sufficiently versed in making these decisions. We had a few people in Israel. You had Rabbi Tendler, Zecher Tzaddik Livracha, people like that, and we need more like them because these are decisions have to be made, and you have to have broad shoulders to make them, and you have to have people on whom we can lean to make those decisions. It's a very important point.
Thank you, Rabbi. Have a good Shabbos.
Have a good Shabbos, everybody. Stay warm and dry.
Have a good Shabbos, Father.
Good
Have a good
Shabbos.
Shabbos.
Shabbos, thank you.
There. So
Thank you, Mandy.
Have a good one.